Hello, welcome back to Doomer Optimism. I'm your host, Nate, and today will be the first of a few recordings that I'm calling Beef Week, where we're going to try to understand what's been going on in the beef industry in the last 2 weeks. It's been a real interesting time and a good lens through which to view the industry as a whole. And so I have some great interviews lined up. First of which today is with Mike Callicrate. Mike's the owner of the Callicrate Cattle Company and Ranch Foods Direct. He's a rancher, an entrepreneur, and a farm advocate. And I am really excited and privileged to talk to him today. Mike, hi. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, good morning, Nate. Thanks for having me.
Well, to start out, I think I'd like to kind of do maybe a little bit of history here. Because my goal, as I said before, is to kind of contextualize some of the controversy of the last 2 weeks, which has involved, a lot of things from a lack of importing of soybeans to China, and then buying soybeans from Argentina, bailing out Argentina, then importing more beef from Argentina, cattle prices going down after they've been up, ranchers really upset and angry at the administration pouring gas on the fire. It's just been a very interesting week. So kind of some interesting splitting between some of the lobbying organizations and a lot of ranchers. So I've been following it really closely and found it fascinating. And I want to contextualize that a little bit here. But to understand why everybody's mad, I think we need to go back. And you have such a rich and broad history in the cattle business that you seem like the perfect person to shed some light on this. So if we go back to maybe how things came to be as you've heard, everybody's heard at this point, not everybody, but many people, 85% of cattle are, processed through the same four companies. A lot about monopolization, unfair markets, bad market practices. How did we get here?
Well, we got here because of a lack of antitrust law enforcement. If you go back to the Reagan years, the 80s, Reagan decided that we needed less regulation. In fact, that was one of the real uh, important parts of his political platform is to reduce government, reduce regulation, and that's probably a really good idea in a lot of cases. But it's a really bad idea when you're dealing with monopoly power, which has got more power than the actual government. And in today's market or in today's world economy, the corporations have gotten so much power that they control policy by controlling Congress and the legislative branch as well. I mean, we've got the Batista brothers who are the major owners of JBS, which is the biggest meat packer in the world, gave Trump $5 million for his inauguration, and within weeks they're listed on the New York Stock Exchange, despite the fact that they're criminals. They've got all kinds of violations, from bribing the last three presidents of Brazil to 2000, 1800 to 2000 government officials to get rotten meat into the United States and full distribution throughout the United States by influencing the uh, uh, FSIS director, Food Safety Inspection Service. I mean, these guys are really bad, and uh, part of the deal with a corporate charter is you can't be a criminal. I mean, you can't lie, cheat, and steal. Well, my goodness, we blew by that. We're allowing that to go on daily, and so we've now got a food system that's extremely fragile, and yeah, it may have some efficiencies in a few places, but boy, is it ever not dependable. And we saw that, of course, during COVID, it exposed it, and we're seeing it now. I mean, well, even look at the egg, the egg shortage, and we've just allowed too few companies to control our food, and much of their sourcing has been overseas. So when it breaks down, we don't even have the ability to produce the product here domestically, and that's certainly the case with beef, where we're importing 20% of the beef and that we consume in this country, and that's beef imports and live animal imports, which are essentially imports uh,
It's
i-
it's
in
wild to me that
themselves.
we're importing that much beef when also we have soybeans, that we're trying to sell to China that doesn't want to buy them now. And so we're using a ton of land to grow soybeans, and yet we have to import our beef. Soybeans that no one wants. That's really, in my opinion, pretty low quality food. It's like, why are we doing it this way?
Well, and in a lot of the expansion of corn and soybean land has been a result of low cattle markets, herd liquidation, and being able to achieve a better income farming that ground than you will grazing that ground. And all of this liquidation of cows and the loss of half our ranchers since 1980 essentially uh, has has resulted in the need for more imports, but also the transition to farm programs. Farmers are smart. I mean, they're gonna figure out how to achieve the maximum income off their land, and as long as we're subsidizing soybeans and corn, they're gonna shift pasture ground to corn and soybeans. But at the same time as they're doing that, we're farming highly erodible land that's extremely marginal, that should have never been taken out of pasture. And so we're losing that topsoil, which is absolutely a big problem, a huge problem for any society throughout history that's lost its topsoil, is lost its civilization.
Maybe well, probably am kind of dumb because I'm going the opposite way. I'm trying to put row crop acres back into pasture. So,
Good for you.
um,
Well, I'd like to see that happen. I've been on uh, a subcommittee, an EPA water subcommittee, prior to the Trump administration coming in. He canceled all that work. But here I am at the table with some of the biggest industrial farming advocates in the country, from the organizations that represent the industrial pig operations, the poultry operations, the big farmers that depend on chemical. All these operations have really hurt our environment considerably. And I've said that to this committee. I said what we need to do is get policy that puts a highly erodible land back to grass, and stop letting landowners, maybe not farmers, but the landowners, play and game the system where they will take highly erodible land out of production, put it into the conservation reserve program, only to, when the contract expires, to do it again, and to farm it, and then put it right back in. And we've got people that have used the government payments on conservation reserve to buy that land essentially. But we're allowing it to continue to be highly erodible, and losing more and more topsoil. And
yeah, and you have the example too that I always come back to of ground that floods periodically that probably ought to be wetland, but because of the crop insurance payments, you lose a crop every 5 years. That's okay, and it shouldn't be farmed. It wouldn't be farmed without this sort of subsidized crop insurance.
Well, it's like planting corn, dryland corn in eastern Colorado and western Kansas. I mean, this year worked. Depending on where you were, it was a lot of thunderstorm activity, so we didn't have the widespread rain that you would need for everyone to get along better. But that's just the sort of environment we're working with now. But you just don't grow dryland corn in western Kansas and eastern Colorado. It's wheat country, and you grow a crop every other year, and you can get along okay. But boy, we've if you fly over, and if you go to my blog, you'll see it in some of those presentations. But the topsoil's gone. I mean, they've played that CRP game of putting it in and taking it out and putting it in again, but the farming practices are wrong. They're out there, and now they're just spraying stuff. You can't hardly live in rural America anymore for all of the chemical drift that you experience. And so it's just almost become unlivable out there. But they've also allowed the soil to erode. And if you fly over, you see all these white hills, and the only way they're growing anything on them is with chemical fertilizer. And more recently, the biggest feedlots in the country several of them are in Colorado, the big JBS Five River feed yards, and they've been around a long time. So they've got 100,000 head operations that have trouble getting rid of the manure. So they've started composting that, and you're seeing some of that compost now make it to these highly erodible acres, which is helpful, but it shouldn't have been a problem to begin with. And of course, the big 100,000 head feedlots are producing more manure than the land around them can responsibly manage or get rid of, and it's become a liability to the soil rather than an asset. Like the Midwest farmer, family farmer with feeding 1,000 head of cattle, which basically eats the crops he grows, and the manure goes back on the land, is absolutely ideal. It's also more efficient. It's also lower cost. Yet it's been wiped out because of a meat packer, big retailer cartel that has block those producers, those people who actually do the work and invest most of the capital consistently over the last 50 years. They've gotten less and less of the consumer dollar back to that farm and ranch gate, and it's forced 85,000 of those what I would call ideal operations out of business.
Well, that's the goal here. We live on a pretty prime part of the country, and to kind of shift back. So we'll see. We're about seven
Where's
years
your
in.
farm, Nate?
It's West Central Illinois, so we're about an hour west of Peoria, Illinois.
Well, you're in good country. Yeah,
It's
you guys
beautiful.
you guys need to be growing the corn. We certainly don't need to be growing it in western Kansas and
I
eastern
don't.
Colorado
We
and
grow a
and
little
and
bit.
you sure do. And but the other thing is, we do grow a lot of corn in western Kansas and eastern Colorado because we're dependent upon the Ogallala aquifer. But when I moved to St. Francis, Kansas, to say 50 years ago, we had 100 foot of water in a 250-foot well. Today, if you measure that well, we've got 25 feet of water. So we've basically mined 75 feet of water out of the Ogallala aquifer at St. Francis, Kansas, in the last 50 years. And of course, just this last year, Garden City, Kansas, who's also over the Ogallala aquifer, has lost a foot and a half of water in 1 year. And there's already many people that whose wells have gone dry. I mean, look at West Texas, New Mexico, on that edge of the Ogallala. They've already dried out. So I mean, but it's a terrible thing when you've got a farmhouse out there that depends on water from the Ogallala and their well goes dry because the big irrigators have pulled it away and squandered it to grow corn that we don't need, and any excess that we grow, or we're shipping it into Mexico, putting those Mexican farmers off the land. And of course, then they're available to go to work in a Smithfield hog house that's feeding the cheap corn that's imported out of the United States. Now,
You see
that's a
how that?
lot. You wrap your head around that and it'll make it spin.
Yep.
And I just remember explaining that to Eric Schlosser and Michael Pollan years ago when they're working on their books, Fast Food Nation, Omnivore's Dilemma, and the Food Inc. film. And it's just like, oh wow, man, how in the world could something like that happen? Well, I love what Mexico's doing right now, pushing back on American imported corn. They don't want the GMOs either, which I would prefer to see them go. And we don't, because we certainly don't need the Roundup that goes with them. So
Well, it's just a
I'd like,
corporate. It's just a corporate product. It's just it helps them
absolutely.
sell more seed, and it helps them sell more. It helps them sell more Roundup, but it doesn't. I mean, it's not. There's not a public benefit to it. It's really good for the companies that sell it. Really good for them.
Well, and it's another example of a capture, not only of government, but of our court system. Clarence Thomas was on the court when they approved the patenting of life, which was really giving GMO Monsanto permission to control our food. And in fact, he not only did not recuse himself from that decision, having been an attorney for Monsanto previously, but he wrote the brief, which gave Monsanto that ability to patent life and control the GMO sale of seeds, and put them all these seed cleaners out of business, and that was a huge uh, event, really, that's led to this super industrialization of agriculture.
Yeah, it's been turbocharged. So, I'd like to know if you wouldn't mind a little bit of how you came to know so much about this. So, just a little bit about your own sort of history and how you got to know sort of and how you got to see, because you kind of had a first front row seat in seeing how this mass the, feedlot to uh, packer pipeline really got to be taken over. So I'm
Well,
curious,
I'll
your
just
own
start at the
personal
beginning.
experience.
I was riding bulls. I was rodeoing, and I got an invitation to go to Lamar Community College in Southeast Colorado to be on the rodeo team. Well, I got there and they put together a pretty good team. We did really well. But while I was in school, the animal science professor, Red Heath, got a hold of me and he said, "Hey, I need you to, you know, get in my animal science class." And I honestly, I'd grown up in 4-H. I had sheep. I had a project, but I was one of 8 children living on 5 acres in Evergreen, Colorado. But I really wanted to be a cowboy. And so I started rodeoing. So anyway, I met Red Heath at Lamar Community College. He got me in his animal science class, put me on his judging team, and I just loved it. I fell in love with the cattle business. Well, I married a girl from there by the name of Vicky Calden, and her folks had a farm and ranch in St. Francis, Kansas. So I was going back there on weekends. I was helping them out. All the while I was rodeoing and making bull ropes for other bull riders, and really making my living making bull ropes. But I really like the agriculture industry, and so after we got married and out of Colorado State University is where I finished up with an animal science degree. We moved back to St. Francis, Kansas, and back then in those early '70s, IBP was around, but it wasn't this market predator that it became later. And the big packers were probably cooperating, but people didn't know that they were cooperating. But I really couldn't. There wasn't room on the farm and ranch for me to make a living, and so I decided after being there for a little bit that why not build a feedlot here in Northwest Kansas? It would be the first one in Cheyenne County, Kansas. Just a super good location for a feedlot, lots of feed and grain production, thanks to the Ogallala Aquifer. And so I built that feedlot with a group of shareholders in 1978, and operated that for several years, 8 years, and moved over to my in-laws' place, and we built our own place, our own feedlot over there in 1986, 87, 88 in those years. But I got really suspicious that, man, I started out, with 20 potential buyers for my finished cattle at my feedlot, and I've got like 4 left. What happened to all the competition? What happened to the Pepper Pack, Litvat Pack, Alpha Beta and Pueblo, Sterling Pack? All the pack, I had 20 packers I could potentially sell to any
And
given
these
week.
and these packers, they were buying your fat cattle, right? And they were taking
That's
them
right.
to their own slaughter facility.
That's right. That's right. And just go back even further. When I was a kid in high school, I worked at Thrifty Food Market, and they had a butcher shop, but everything that was in the meat counter was cut from a carcass. And so the carcasses would come in quarters, and those guys would pack them in and put them in the cooler. And they weren't these giant, 950-pound carcasses. They were, 1,100-pound, 1,000-pound live cattle that produced these super beautiful, high quality cattle, mostly English crosses, like Angus
So
Herefords.
this is important. I want to kind of understand this. So, you'd have somebody come, a lot of competition, and they're going to buy your animals and they're going to slaughter it, and then they'll be hung, and then
That's
like
right.
a half of an animal will be taken and then butchered at a butcher
Into a
shop.
butcher shop where there were skilled butchers, guys that knew how to break that carcass down
Hmm.
and sell all of it, sell all parts of it, from grind to steaks to whatever it may be.
So that
And
was how it
and so
worked
that's
as of
where
like up to 40 years ago. That's sort of just how it worked. You'd have
that's right.
you'd sell off your animals to buyers who were competing with each other and who would take the animal, that way you'd find a fair price with 20 different buyers, slaughter it, move it to a butcher shop, and that's how it got to the consumer.
Yeah, and if you go to my blog and just type in search for story of the steer, the meat association did a picture of just a graphic of how a steer broke down, the live animal to the packer to the retailer. And back then, the producer, the seller of that finished animal, got 82% of the consumer food dollar, while the actual packer sold to the retailer for less than what he paid for the animal. And the reason they could do that is because of the hide, the head, the heart, liver, tongue, and tail were worth enough to make money for the packer, and he could still sell to the retailer for less than he paid for the live animal because of all those what we call offal products were worth a lot. And then the retailer would
So that
mark
was
it
their
up a
take.
reasonable.
Their take was just
Yeah,
all the
and
non-beef stuff was their take.
that was their take, and they did well. They did really well, and the retailer did really well, and the producer did well. But that was when the market was really competitive and had a lot of buyers and a lot of sellers and a lot of people doing great work. And the owner of that slaughterhouse was in that slaughterhouse, probably working, and I mean doing some of the work, and and the butcher shop had people cutting that were super skilled. I mean, and extremely well paid. And I just remember the manager of the meat market in Evergreen there when he bought a new pickup. It was a brand new 4-wheel drive pickup, and man, he was so proud of that pickup. And I had just turned 16 and got my license, and he pitched the keys to me. And he said, "Hey, take it for a spin." And it scared me. I mean, I'm going to get in a brand new Ford 4-wheel drive pickup. I'm 16, barely know how to drive, and he gave me those keys, and so I took it down to Kittredge, down the canyon, and back up to Evergreen. And man, I was never so honored to have been working with a guy that. But this guy, I mean, they own their own homes, they drove decent vehicles. It totally different than it is today. A
And
worker in
that's
a slaughterhouse might be living 7 families to a trailer house in Garden City, Kansas.
yeah,
So
famously just
yeah.
awful conditions. So you look at the chain that we just described here, right? And you've got the ranchers who are making a living, good living. You've got, the slaughter facilities that are able to, make it work from, the byproducts. They're able to kind of support their business. Then you've got the butchers. They're skilled, good jobs, that sell it directly to the consumer. So every link of the chain here, there's sort of like a way to make a living. There's dignity, and there's a lot of like self-ownership in the whole chain of food from the live cow all the way to your plate.
Exactly. And I think the way to tell the story of what happened is to go to Jonathan Quitney's book, Vicious Circles. He wrote that in 1979. Jonathan Quitney was a Wall Street investigative reporter, and he wrote the whole story. But I hadn't discovered that book until later, until I filed a lawsuit against IBP along with other plaintiffs uh, back in 1996. I got to know a former vice president of IBP. His name was Hughes Bagley, and Hughes was suing IBP because of some mistreatment he had on his retirement account. And so we got to be friends, and he was saying, "Hey, Mike," he said, "you got to read Jonathan Whitney's book," and I did. I picked it up, and he describes how in 1970 IBP made a deal with the New York Mafia. Mo Steinman orchestrated the deal, and they bribed the grocery store executives and the workers union to accept boxed beef. None of them wanted the boxed beef, but Courier Holman, who was the CEO and president of IBP, went to New York, instructions from the banker, either do something or you were going to have to shut IBP down. We're going to call the notes on IBP because they weren't making it. And so basically, they went to New York City, they made a deal with the mafia, which represented at that time about 25% of the total beef consumption in the United States, in that circle around, from New York City to Philadelphia to, that whole area. So IBP captured that market by bribing the grocery store executives and the union officials. So what happened is they ended up getting in trouble legally, in legal trouble, and they ended up being prosecuted for the bribery. In the end, the court made IBP pay $7,500, no jail time. I mean, it was nothing. It wasn't even a slap on the wrist. It was silly, and they just kept right on going. And
Boy,
so
you'll find that
it,
story a lot. Cargill just had the slap on the wrist fine. The
oh yeah,
Brazilian beef cartels had plenty of those, and they just keep going.
and we do absolutely nothing about it. There's no injunctive relief. And I don't care what litigation we're talking about or what settlement we're talking about. None of them include injunctive relief to make them stop cheating us. And and
So
so and so basically what happened is IBP then decided, and of course this comes from Hughes Bagley, and it's in the notes that I've got from Hughes, but they talked about a Boston consulting firm coming into IBP during that middle 70s time period. And basically IBP was trying to become more efficient. How do we make more money? How do we grow faster? All of that corporations like to do. And basically, the Boston consulting outfit said, look, you're going to be better off cooperating than competing. You've got Montfort, who is big, and you've got Cargill, who's big. Montfort eventually became ConAgra, then Swift. Then it's JBS. So they've become owned by the biggest meat packer in the world. But back then, the idea was, and it's in writing, that they would be better off cooperating than competing. And that is what they did. And that was the downfall. So now the big packers have positioned themselves to be able to buy cattle cheaper through cooperating with one another, whether they delegated territory or whatever. We would see, for example, an IBP buyer coming in on a Monday morning and bidding a price not to buy. I mean, bidding a price that was so low, it would make the feedlot manager literally throw up in the parking lot. I saw it happen.
so
And
correct.
then what he was doing is he was conditioning that seller of cattle to take the next bid from the buyer had that bought all the cattle from that feedlot. So they worked together to condition the seller, and as a result, we went from 82% of the consumer dollar going back to the farm and ranch gate, the producer of livestock, to as low as 27% during COVID. So how do you expect farmers and ranchers to make it? And of course, this is why we've lost half our ranchers. But the same thing has happened in the grain side. Uh, but I think that Jonathan Whitney's story of vicious circles is really instructive. I just wished
So
I'd have seen it sooner.
so the way that, and then I want to get back to your own story. We're going to have to take a lot of detours here, and that's just fine. But what you're describing, that bidding process, right? Isn't that precisely what the Packers and Stockyard Acts of 1921 was written to prevent?
Exactly. Exactly. 120 years ago, we decided that we didn't want a meatpacking monopoly, and thanks to Senator John Kendrick out of Wyoming, we got some legislation that led to the Packers and Stockyards Act of 1921. And basically it broke them up. It made them stop controlling the whole supply chain from the sale yard to the packer to the retail, all the way to the rail cars. I mean, these big meat packers, five of them controlled like 70% of the market back then, and they were nothing but a cartel, nothing but a trust, basically. And they were one of the many trusts. There was the steel trust, the railroad trust, the banking trust, and there was the meatpacking trust. And so Congress decided we can't have monopoly power. Concentration of power and wealth is a really, really bad thing, and we don't want it. And so we got the legislation that we needed specific to the meat packers. And it was to protect the producer of livestock, the seller of livestock, not consumers. It was to protect the producer of livestock. Consumer law was the Clayton and Sherman Act, if to protect them from monopoly power. But this Packers and Stockyards Act was a brilliant law.
And it's
And it basically said you can't show preference and you can't discriminate.
and it seems like it was effective, and it kind of what you're describing at the beginning, more of the conversation here where you had 20 different buyers. um that the kind of the law seems like it was still operating as intended. That has changed, and I think it changed in your lifetime. And so let's get back to your own story
Right. And,
about
and and so it's
from
it's
there.
it's all in my history essentially. So I had 20 buyers I could sell to in 1978. By 19 oh in the 80s, I was down to one packer. One, literally one. There
You had
there
one
was
buyer.
four. One buyer, only had one buyer. They had delegated territory. So I only had one buyer I could sell to. It was National Beef. So it was 1998, time between New Year's and Christmas, that I had 14,000 head of cattle in a 12,000 head feedlot. And I had them in there. I'd already sued IBP in 1996 as one of 10 plaintiffs, but they had literally got serious about blackballing me because I was speaking out. I was causing all kinds of problems for them, and they decided let's just eliminate Callicrate. So here, and I had a lot of people feeding with me that own the cattle, but they were supporting me in my battle against the Packer monopoly. But we got caught because I couldn't sell my cattle anymore. But I didn't know it, and they didn't tell me. They just let me build up my inventories. I was getting cattle in and couldn't sell them, so I ended up with 14,000 head of cattle and a 12,000 head feedlot. Sometime in that week between Christmas and New Year's, my national beef buyer can't stop by, and he always stopped by every week and basically just drank coffee, and we talked, and I said, Don, what is the deal? I'm seeing national beef trucks going right down Highway 27, right by my front door, and I can't sell to national. And those trucks are coming out of South Dakota and Nebraska, way further away than my feedlot is to national beef in liberal Kansas. What is going on? And he finally broke down and he said, oh man, he was emotional about it too. He says, Mike, I'm really, really sorry, but my head buyers told me, my bosses told me I can't buy your cattle anymore. So I was done. I had nobody to sell my cattle to. I hadn't seen an XL Cargill buyer in like 11 years. And he was 30 miles away in Goodland, Kansas. And so what happened was I called Dan Glickman. He was Secretary of Agriculture. And it was his responsibility to enforce the Packers and Stockyards Act. And I asked him why he didn't enforce that act. And he says, well, Mike, in this modern day of globalization, key word,
Keyword.
that in the modern day of globalization, we need big meat packers that can do business globally. So he had drank the Clinton Kool-Aid, basically. We got to go global. All this talk about efficiency and economies of scale, and the Ronald Reagan philosophy had really, really matured into this globalization mentality. Free trade, and big corporations now searching the world for the cheapest of whatever they can buy and then selling into the highest consuming market, which is still today the United States market. But Dan Glickman did say that he would make ConAgra buy my cattle. ConAgra was now, it's now JBS, but it's the old Montfort plant in Greeley, Colorado. And they ended up buying all my cattle as they became finished. And I ended up with a really nice facility, completely empty and no cattle. 15 people went to town without jobs. And one of the major buyers of commodities in our community was now done, out of business. And I show that picture. I call it, emptiness. I mean, it's this nice feeding operation without a hoof in it. And of course, that was the big signal to every other feeder in the country to do not cross the meat packer, do not speak out, do not complain. You're gonna lose if you do. And that punishment to me was what really chilled other operations from saying anything, although they knew full well that the Packers were cooperating, they weren't competing, and they were rigging these markets. And we kept having these sort of what we call black swan events, where the market would drop, like in the spring of 94, it dropped $17 in 6 weeks when IBP pulled out. And that ended up in some litigation separate of what I had. But it showed at Amarillo, Texas, they had 122% captive supply, 22% more cattle than they needed. But IBP was the market leader in this cartel control. They would lead, and then the other packers would follow. And so we'd have these crazy market crashes. And the other black swan was the Tyson fire in Garden City, where cattle prices go down and box beef prices go up. We just had a recent black swan that you just described in the introduction, this last couple of weeks, with the Argentine beef deal. We had cattle prices drop 30 some dollars on feeder cattle, 20 some dollars on live cattle, which is devastating to the producer, at the same time as box beef prices go up to the big retailers.
So here's a question. Help me fill in a gap here. So we described the chain of cattle to consumer before, right? From hanging to
Yes.
butcher to this. Tell me about box beef. What is it? And tell me about it.
Well, box beef was really the weapon that that the big packers used to put the small guys out of business. So we had these really high quality and efficient small slaughterhouses. And I'm saying small, maybe they process 200 to 400 head a day. Those were like the Denver Packers, the Pueblo Packers. They were all over Nebraska and St. Joe, Missouri, and they were all throughout the country. These really great little local regional packers, but they sold carcasses. They didn't sell box beef. But and tying that box beef thing back to the New York Mafia, that's how they bribed their way in to get the box beef. And so what happened was the small packers couldn't sell carcasses to companies that were using box beef. They had made the transition, they'd taken the rails out of their processing rooms, and they were just now 100% box beef. And so what happened was, and I've got the notes on this too from IBP's executive meetings, is they had planned a method. It was called the tram system, and they basically got you hear about the swinging beef back in the day, and those are full carcasses, half carcasses hanging from rails in these what we call tram trailers, and they're extra high and they're extra low, and you can put a full half carcass without breaking it, without splitting it into quarters, into these tram trailers. And IBP used those tram trailers to lock these small Midwest, mostly slaughterhouses, into their box beef system. And so basically, that slaughterhouse in Lexington, Nebraska, for example, they go out and they buy live cattle and they slaughter them, and now they've got a carcass to sell to IBP. Well, they competed with IBP to buy the cattle to begin with, and now they have no other customer, no other place to go with the carcass except IBP. And boy, that was a planned strategy and very smart strategy by ABP. And those packers went out of business in a very rapid manner. They're gone. And so once they're gone, now we've got everybody dependent upon box beef.
So and what exactly? So carcass hanging on a rail is a box beef. I assume is broken down further and then put in a box. Like, can you define what
Correct.
box beef is?
It's broken down. A box beef is broken down to where just almost anybody off the street can cut it up into steaks and grind it into hamburger.
Uh-huh.
So you're buying primals, and of course
Yes,
now
right.
with the big retailers, we've even taken it further. Now we're cutting it up into the actual ribeye steak, strip steak, fillet, pot, whatever, roast. All of it's fully value added and retail packed with exploited labor.
So another little aside here. We hear a lot about one of the main justifications for the food inspection regime that we can get into more is that it's safer. Now, what you're telling me here, it sounds to me, I'm no scientist, but it really seems as though hanging in a cooler is going to make a much safer product than to cram it into a box and shipping a box. Is there a food safety difference you think between those processes?
Well, you remember the Jack in the Box problem in, was that early 90s?
I do.
The kids died of E. coli in the Jack in the Box in the Northwest. But the one thing we never acknowledged and never identified was box beef being the culprit in that problem. And what happens in a slaughterhouse, and one of the reasons IBP wanted so much to go to box beef is because they could increase their throughput so much. If you got to hang that carcass 6 to 7 days before you cut it to improve the safety of the carcass, oh, that's a complete no go.
So that
So
does
that's
if
where they came.
you hang it so that does improve the safety of it.
6 to 7 days, based on the University of Wisconsin research, makes that carcass essentially 100% safe because you've got your anaerobic versus your aerobic bacteria, and the good bacteria win over the bad bacteria if you hang that carcass 6 to 7 days at 38 degrees and whatever you know humidity that's required.
So food safety,
And
the reason that we have to do all this rigmarole, right, and that the big companies hide behind food safety is as simple as keeping the carcass hanging for 6 to 7 days.
totally. but it's 100% in contrary to their throughput and their profitability in the box beef program. And the other problem, I mean, yes, we have steam pasteurization, we have acid washes, but we haven't changed. The other thing we haven't changed is workers shoulder to shoulder. The guy next to you, you're teaching him how to do his job, and you just started yesterday, and he started this morning. I mean, high turnover, unskilled workers, ingested material manure getting on the carcass. What are we going to do? Well, we're not going to slow the chain down and get more skilled workers and go back to what we had prior to IBP and the cartel. We're just simply going to have to come up with technology that addresses the crap on the meat. Well, remember when we were trying to irradiate everything? We were trying to get approval to irradiate everything. All that was addressing a symptom, not the problem. And we're going to, and we're back now, and they're calling it pasteurization and whatever you want. But food safety is a huge problem in this industrialized model, and we haven't addressed that problem. If we could go back to the small plants that were local regional, hang these carcasses 6 to 7 days like we do with Ranch Foods Direct, it's a whole nother world. Plus, how much have you improved the quality of that meat by putting that age on that
Aging it.
carcass? Huge amount, a huge amount. And of course, you know, how much more efficient can you get than at Callicrate Cattle Company? We raise the cattle and the hogs, and we slaughter them right on site, so there's no trucking. There's no trucking bill on that live animal. We only truck the carcass, which is 36% less weight than the live animal, ship the carcass into Colorado Springs where skilled butchers cut it up, and our best cuts are going to have at least 2 weeks age on them before they hit the market or hit the butcher counter at our stores. And so we've done everything we can to make that product as good as it can be, but that is not what happens in the industrial model, in the controlled supply chain model that exploits the producer, the worker, and the consumer, these middlemen. And this is what gets cut out of every interview I do, whether it's a national news or a regional news. There's these editors don't want to talk about meatpacking monopoly and retail cartels. Because that's their advertisers. They seem to edit that out almost every time. And
Well,
and
here at
this is
Doomer
what we have
Optimism,
to talk
here at
about.
Doomer Optimism, we're not going to cut this out. I promise.
Yeah,
Is the
yeah.
point?
Yeah, but just kind of getting back a little bit to my history, and so here I am. I've got 14,000 head in this feedlot. I end up getting the Secretary of Agriculture to force ConAgra to buy all of them and close down. And then I got to thinking, this is just wrong. I mean, every other feedlot is scared to even speak out against this abusive market power, but the feedlot's solution is to hook up with the packer, to become a supplier to the packer, where the packer gets those cattle and doesn't have to compete for them, doesn't have to bid on them. And
If you
so they
can't beat
become a
them, join them, right?
captive. If you can't beat them, join them. And that's what the biggest feedlots did. And of course, it gave them an advantage in the market because they were receiving preference, while the other guys like me were getting lower and lower prices. And so nobody's speaking out. I've got a facility that is empty. It's probably $1.5 million at that time facility that's unused. And I just decide, why not sell meat instead of livestock? And so I put some cattle on feed, like one load of Angus steers, and I fed them out. And I called Jim Marsden up at the University of Kansas, and he was a meat scientist at the university there. And I said, hey, Jim, I've got some cattle that I want slaughtered. Who would you recommend? Because by then, the small packers had gone out of business. But he said there was this one guy, one small packer in Colorado Springs, GNC Packing Company, and they were really good. He said, and they had just put in some technology to remove blood, and it was called rinse and chill. And he said, I've been following that technology, and the reason I know him is because of it. And he said, that's who I'd pick. I would send your cattle to them, and that's not that far. It's 200 miles. And so I called up GNC and I said, hey, can you slaughter some cattle for me? And they said, oh, heck yeah, love it. And that's what they did for that was their business, was slaughtering cattle for other people. The other guys that were slaughtering there were some buffalo guys that were slaughtering buffalo and selling the meat. Rocky Mountain Natural, a really good local outfit. And so I sent Frank our cattle, and then I hooked up with the uh, Meat Cutters Union, the UFCW, United Food and Commercial Workers Union. And I said, guys, we're kind of similarly situated. I'm a producer being exploited by the big packer. You're a worker being exploited by the big packer. Your wages have gone to hell. I mean, can we work together? And they said, heck yeah. And so I took these cattle and I broke them down into retail at GNC Packing Company, and the United Food and Commercial Workers Union were some of our first and best customers. And we did a picnic with them at their annual gathering in Kansas City, and it went over really well, and we sold a lot of meat that way. But it wasn't enough,
So how did they
and
market?
so
What was that? How did they market the beef? Or like you?
direct to their union members.
Okay, all
And
right.
so, yeah, we were just selling it direct, fully retail ready, wrapped in paper and boxed and sent to them, freezer ready, like you'd buy a half a beef or a quarter of a beef or something like that. That's how we sold it to them.
And that was how it
And
got. It was done at the place in Colorado Springs.
all at GNC Packing Company.
They cut
They
it.
had
They took
a
it down to the
slaughter
cut.
and a cut room,
Yeah.
both. And so they
Okay.
did a lot of custom beef. But on the other hand, they were cutting primals for like Rocky Mountain Natural buffalo guys. They were cutting primals and then they were further processing it so they could sell into retail.
Uh-huh.
And so it turned out that Rocky Mountain Natural and myself, Callicrate Cattle Company, became GNC's biggest customers. But in the process, we ended up finding a plant in Oklahoma City, the old Canadian Valley plant that had been shut down because of the IBP big packer cartel, and it was sitting there empty. So Bob Funk with Express Ranches goes in there and leases the plant or buys the plant. I'm not sure. I don't remember what, but he gave us a little corner of the plant. But the great thing about his operation is he could break the carcass down, and so we started shipping carcasses, quarters, from 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 Colorado Springs to Oklahoma City, and then we were breaking it, and we ended up selling into the Rangers ballpark, the American Airlines Center. We had accounts in Tulsa, Oklahoma City. That might have been the best years of Ranch Foods Direct
And
because we
that was
sold.
going, and it was going to where it was butchered, quartered, and then it was not boxed. It was hanging when it went to this place in Oklahoma City.
Correct. Correct. And then we cut it all down into the hamburger patties and the steaks, and did a lot of boxing there for these customers. And we had a really top notch manager with Ranch Foods Direct. His name was Lou McClurg. He was out of Mesquite, Texas. And so Lou guided Ranch Foods Direct in those early years. Well, then one day Frank Greninger calls up from GNC Packing Company. And he says, "Hey, why don't you guys come back to Colorado Springs? We've got this little building over here on El Paso Street that used to be a meat cutting operation for a steakhouse, a group of steakhouses in Colorado Springs, and it's for it. We can rent it, we can lease it, and you guys." He said, "I'll give you all of my cutting." He says, "I'll do the slaughter, and you guys do all the cutting, and so we can cut for other people as well as ourselves." Then put a little and we did. We came back to Colorado Springs. We took this little plant over. We remodeled it. We put in a carcass cooler. We built a little small retail space that just rocked, and we started doing everything in Colorado Springs.
So again, to recap, at this point, you're feeding in Kansas, right? And then you're taking it to this, what was it called?
GNC Packing Company in
GNC
Colorado
Packing
Springs.
Company. They kill it, hang it, and then you have right next door. You were breaking it down,
That's right,
and
just
then
across
it's
town.
retail and
Yeah,
direct to consumer.
absolutely. And boy, we got along great because GNC gave us their wholesale customers that they'd had for years. And so and then we've still got the keg in Manitou. We still got some of those original customers. A lot of them have gone away, and a bunch of them went away during COVID. But we had a really nice wholesale business at that time but also at that time, you saw the growth of big food service from Cisco to US Foods to a handful of those companies really dominating the food service market, which then they would go in and they'd say, we've got the same thing as Callicrate, except it's cheaper. And they'd predatory price, they'd give kickbacks. All of that is another story of how you lose wholesale and where we're at today without essentially we just don't have access to wholesale markets because they're so predatory.
So
And
there's
and
corporate
so
capture of the actual packing, right? That was sort of the leading thing that
yes,
you saw happen. And then
yes,
after that, you have corporate consolidation around retail and wholesale.
yes,
And then
yes,
then you're
exactly.
trying to compete with that. But it's the same thing basically. That just happened again. They just want to take every little piece of the pie. And so
Right.
you
But
lose it
but
here and then you're losing it here.
early on that meat packer concentration gave them the power to really dictate terms to the retailers.
Mhm.
And you can see as retailers became more consolidated, in Walmart in particular. I remember the years when Walmart wasn't even selling groceries, and now they're the biggest grocery seller in the country. When then Kroger is huge as well. Kroger and they they were going to merge with Albertsons and Safeway, and we were able to block that. But but the deal is concentration follows concentration. But at one time, the big meat packer had the ability to dictate price to the cattle seller and also dictate terms to the retailer. And so they were sitting there here in the middle doing really well with IBP and the really three other packers, the big four.
So
And
there was
so
an opportunity there for a moment, right, where you were able to do the wholesale thing.
that's right.
And so there was a market there because then you know, you could actually compete on price with,
That's right.
at the wholesale market, but then you couldn't compete on price because
Yeah.
the
Wholesale's gone. Wholesale's gone. And this is the real flaw of USDA giving grant money out, or the government even giving grant money out to build small plants. You can build a small plant, but if you don't have a market to sell into, they go broke and our taxpayer money is wasted. This is exactly what's happened as a result of all this money thrown out there to try to, build small plants
it's almost like the
because we haven't
USDA is
supported them.
it's almost like the USDA is spineless and won't actually take on the problem.
They're totally spineless. They're controlled by the big packers. That revolving door between agency and corporation has been going on forever. And they are spineless. They won't enforce the Packers and Stockyards Act. They own Congress. It's up to Congress to dictate to USDA, enforce the act. And heck, during Trump's first term, they completely moved Packers and Stockyards over into the another division of USDA, the Ag Marketing section of USDA, to where it got zero enforcement. We just, I mean, other than, keeping track of a few sale barns, making sure they pay for, the buyer pays for the seller for the cattle. I mean, they really don't do anything at all. And so they've allowed it to happen. But what happened was the Packers, I used to talk about how the the Packers were robbing the bank and the big feedlots were driving the getaway car because they were jumping in with the Packer, giving them the captive supplies they needed to be able to buy cattle cheaper. So it was a partnership and essentially, and all at the expense of producers. But then what happened is the big retailers got bigger, and Walmart leading them along with Kroger, and now now Amazon with Whole Foods. Now we've got entities that are more powerful than the Packers. So now the big retailers are driving the getaway or are robbing the bank, and the Packers are driving the getaway car. And so it's easier to buy cattle cheaper, and it has been now. It has been for a very long time. It's easier to buy cattle cheaper if you're a meat packer than it is to sell meat higher or box beef higher to a big retailer and a big food service company. And so now all this margin has gone to the big retailer, and they have absolutely zero intention of giving it up. And this is buying more cattle out of Argentina does nothing, zero, nothing to lower the prices to consumers. You've got to address that market concentration and monopoly power in the middlemen to solve that problem.
So
All it
we've got
does is
monopolized power, the packers, wholesalers, retailers.
that's right.
Every link
It,
of the chain is
and the
everybody's taking their
producer
cut
of
and there's no
livestock has
competition.
the producer of livestock has no power. And so, but just the announcement that we're going to bring in Argentine beef was another one of those black swan events that just destroyed the price for the livestock producer. We've lost half of them already, but but people don't want to talk about why. And the why is big, powerful actors, middlemen that buy the livestock and sell the meat to consumers. I love Lena Khan. When she was in the Federal Trade Commission, she was responsible for improving a lot of conditions around consumer welfare. I mean, banks overcharging on bounce checks or insufficient funds. I mean, all these things that she was doing we don't even know about. And one of the biggest things she did for all of us was she blocked the Kroger Albertsons Safeway mergers. And that was a huge thing. But all during the campaign of the last campaign, nobody wanted to talk about the work she was doing as an antitrust cop in the Federal Trade Commission, the great work she was doing, because both political parties are under the control of a handful of oligarchs. And those oligarchs are the Walton family. Those oligarchs are the Tysons of the world, the ADMs, the Cargills, the BlackRocks, the Vanguards, the State Streets. Concentrated power and wealth has never been worse, and it's always been the greatest threat to any free society. And yet we ignore antitrust law enforcement because we are so subservient to these powerful oligarchs that are supposedly going to get them elected.
And so apparently, right, we're supposed to believe, that this is what it takes to get us to feed the world, to get us safe food and to get us food at a reasonable price. Like that's the trade-off, right? That's what we're supposed to be getting in this deal, right?
Yeah,
As consumers,
right.
we're supposed to be getting cheap, safe meat. But as we already established, this whole regime doesn't actually increase safety. But right, there must be these huge operations must be more efficient than these smaller operations, right? They must be more efficient, more able to break down more carcasses per worker, things like that, right?
Well, let me just talk about GNC Packing Company for a second. There were 4 guys that worked that kill floor. They hung carcasses, and then the other part of the place broke them down, or either that or shipped the carcass out to be broke down. But 4 guys ran that kill floor. 4 men with a very simple system of a kill box, bleeding hoist, cradle, you know, split saw, put them in the cooler. I mean, we've been doing this now for 10,000 years. I don't know, but it's very simple. It's not that hard. It's hard work, but 4 guys hung 40 animals a day. So that's 10 carcasses per man. And these are skilled guys that have worked together for a long time and they love the work they do. Yes, they're tired when they go home at night, but they're well paid. How many cattle does IBP do per man? So go ahead. Let's look at Dakota City, their biggest plant, Garden City, their second biggest plant. How many employees and how many animals per day? Divide it out, and it's almost 1.6 animals per man per day, compared to G&C doing 10 animals per man. Who's more efficient?
Now I
Oh, but
assume
the
they're taking it.
pushback is,
Go
wait a
ahead.
minute. The pushback is IBP puts them in a box. See, that's the difference. And so they're putting them in a box. Okay, well, let's look at that. Why in the heck would you put them in a box when you're going to sell at retail? So at Callicrate Cattle Company, we put it in a carcass, we ship it into Colorado Springs, where then you would put it in a box. But how much of our meat never hits a box because it's cut into the final retail, whether it's for us in Ranch Foods Direct stores or whether it's for the people we custom process for, we're bypassing the box so we don't even have that expense. So who's the more efficient operator? It's by far the GNC Packing Company kill crew and somebody breaking it down direct retail. but they'd still outperform IBP even if they were putting it in a box. But the bottom line is IBP has gone to unskilled workers that only do one thing, and when that wrist quits working or whatever, they throw them on the used person pile, get some more cheap workers in. So nobody's winning in that except for IBP executives and shareholders. And so they can't even talk about efficiency. Let's talk about water on the declining Ogallala Aquifer. The small plant in St. Francis, Kansas at Callicrate Cattle Company is using from 30 to 50 gallons per animal processed. IBP's plant in Garden City is using, and all the big plants like that plant are using over 700 gallons of water per animal processed.
Per animal?
Per animal processed. So they're
Good
not,
Lord.
I can't think of a way that they're more efficient. I mean, we've got cattle feeders in Iowa right now that are putting 500 to 600 miles on a finished steer or heifer to go to Pennsylvania. The closest market that they can sell into is Pennsylvania. And that would be a JBS plant. That's the old Moyer beef plant. How efficient is it to haul a 900-pound carcass animal or a 15 or 100-pound live animal to 900 or to 500 or 600 miles? Think of the expense that represents. But the packer doesn't pay that. The producer pays that, but they have no other choices. And Iowa used to have all kinds of meat packers available, for not only cattle but for hogs. They're gone now. But going back to the GNC thing just for a second. So GNC was operating and I was slaughtering cattle there. Rocky Mountain was slaughtering buffalo, but Rocky Mountain was looking at the possibility of putting in their own slaughterhouse. They were big enough, they'd grown enough that they were looking at putting their own slaughterhouse in Brush, Colorado. And I knew that, and I was really worried about it because it was going to mean GNC would come under financial pressure, and they were one of the very last surviving packers in the country of small packers. And so I decided to work with a group to develop a mobile slaughter unit. And the ironic thing is, we used the old tram trailer that IBP put the small packers out of business with. We used that for our mobile slaughter unit as the main structure. And so we remodeled those on the inside. We put a cooler on them. We had a part where we skinned and gutted and split, and it was brilliant. It worked great. We could do 15 head a day pretty easily in
15 head a
that
day
mobile
in the
slaughter
unit, and
unit.
then where do they hang? Where do they age?
There was a cooler. The limiting factor, the reason we could only do 15 head a day is because that's all the cooler would hold.
Okay.
So the cooler section on that trailer would hold 15 head. And then we got pretty creative and we put a little docking section on the end of the trailer to where a semi could just back up to it and get a good seal. And then we could split the carcasses into quarters and put them on a semi trailer, which we owned a couple of them, and we'd ship those into Colorado Springs. So that worked really well. And it
Now,
was
how does that
done as
work
a
with the
docking.
USDA? You
Yeah,
had to
that was
have
all
an inspector
USDA
there,
inspected.
so you
It
had
sure was. Yeah.
yeah.
But the deal was, and I worked with Temple Grandin on this. She's always been an advisor on the work that I do. But Temple said, Mike, you can't move it. You've got to park it. You've got to put a good corral system in, which is what we did. The same corral system that the bull riders use, the PBR that they move around. It's a portable system. We put corral system in like that, with a kill box, a bleed hoist on the outside of the trailer, and we had electricity going to it and water, and then we had our wastewater. Well, the wastewater went into one of the holding ponds at the feedlot, and it was considered agricultural waste, so we didn't have any issues there. And so all that happened at the cattle company, and we poured a slab of concrete to where it was easy to wash down and after in the bleeding area and so forth, and that worked really well. But then weather started to become a factor. This was outside. The trailer was outside. So we built a building and we moved the trailer inside. And then I got a call one day from Walt Schweitzer up in Montana at the Montana Farmers Union. And this was during COVID. and we were rocking along. We were killing our animals in this building inside the tram trailer. And Walt says, Mike, would you sell that trailer? And I said, well, I'm using it. And he said, well, we'd really like to buy it. We've got a program up here we want to start to where we can start training butchers. And I thought it was a great idea. And so we very hurriedly just put a structure inside the building to replace that tram trailer. And the tram trailer then went to Montana to be part of the Montana State University program to train new butchers. And we ended up with a kill floor that's the simplest, lowest cost, easiest to build of anywhere in the country. And so now we're fully inside. We've got a carcass cooler that will hold 70 head. We've got a little cut room that we've built that we can do some cutting there as well. But this is the most efficient, lowest cost, best little operation that I've ever seen. And it just flies right in the face of these big multinational corporations that just extract wealth and pillage and plunder and exploit, you know, producers, workers, and consumers.
So what's the what's the bottleneck here? What's the like what's stopping us from scaling, not scaling that place bigger, but scaling these modular sort of
Replicating.
systems? Yes, replicating. What's stopping
Yeah,
that? Like
what's
what are
what's
the
what's
obstacles?
stopping us? The thing that's stopping us from replicating is market access, and inspection. And I talk to my friends like Greg Gunthorpe, and we've established that USDA's inspection process with the HACCP plans and the additional staff that you need and the hours that you work on paperwork instead of actually processing an animal is going to raise the costs of around 30 to 40% for a plant. They're going to slow down the number of animals that can go through that plant. And you have to have a food safety person that costs plenty. And it's highly stressful. The inspection process is seriously stressful. If you miss a stun, they're going to shut you down. In fact, they might put you out of business if you miss a stun, where the big packers miss 2 to 3% every day, all day.
I'm kidding.
And so with that, we've got inspection that's a major barrier. So now our costs are higher. Now we can't get market access because Cisco says they're selling the same thing except cheaper, and their stuff's coming from the 4 packers. And the US Food says the same thing. Big retailers don't want it because they can't make the margins that they make when they buy from the big packers. And so there
So
is no market access.
I want to clarify here because it's important. I want to, like I said, we're trying to contextualize this. I think there's an idea that we've kind of rebutted a little bit. The reason that they're able to sell things cheaper is because they're more efficient, but that's not the case. It's because they collude with one another, and because they're so large, they don't need to. Yeah, like they can afford to they take a little tiny bit of profit, you know,
That's
and
right.
and so they can take pennies, which someone else couldn't stay in business if you're taking pennies. They can do that, and they're working together to kind of set the prices that they're on one end of the chain and setting prices on the other end of the chain and kind of just dividing the spoils amongst themselves more or less.
Right. And just think about this. Where do you sell a hide now? Cattle hide. When I started with GNC Packing Company in 2000, the hide would pay for the processing and I could walk away with a carcass and some money, a check. But it was kind of like going back in the story of the steer. The packer made enough on the drop credits that they didn't have to charge you for the slaughter because they were making that money off the offal. And today, even there's even all the plants in Wyoming. I mean, I've been to 3 of them up in Wyoming that are fairly new since kind of the COVID days, and they're paying $65 a ton to drop their slaughter waste off at the landfill. What an insult to an animal that gives its life, and we're going to throw the hide away rather than tan it and use it. So we get nothing for our hides. Small plants get nothing for their hides, and in fact, they've got a cost to get rid of those hides. Well, what if we could bring back a competitive market in the hide business that the big meat packers have also taken away from us through their monopoly power? If we could get $100 a head for our hides again, that would literally build the local regional infrastructures that we need to feed ourselves consistently, sustainably, in a resilient manner. That would do it. But the government stands by and does nothing. As Darling is the only company left now that picks up rendering. So, and we literally have to pay them to pick up whatever bones and so forth that we can't use from our process. Where they used to pay us, now they're charging to pick up. And so there's all these factors. Take away the markets, and I mean, when we slaughter for an individual and turn their beef into a retail ready product, it's so much better deal. It's a so much better deal than selling a live animal or selling into a wholesale market. Because they're selling direct to their customer, the end consumer. And so that average price today at retail that USDA does a scanner analysis on, if you take the big box stores like Kroger and Walmart, the average price today is $9.85. That's reported every month on a USDA meat price spread. It's $9.85. Well, if you look back and take out all the processing costs, pay the workers that do the cutting and the processing, the slaughter and everything, you pay them a fair wage. I mean, you're getting $3.30 some cents a hundredweight for your live animal, and you're bypassing Walmart and selling direct to a consumer, but selling them a far better quality meat product than they'd ever get at a big box store. So that opportunity still exists right now, but it's become more and more difficult to sell to end consumers with all the noise that's in the market, because everybody's got a direct to retail program going on, and theirs is the best, and if it's grass fed it's better, if it's grain fed it's bad, and all this stuff is going on out there, and consumers can't figure it out. And the other problem is we've got cattle prices after 50 years finally back where they need to be. They're finally back where they should be, and probably aren't as high as they should be in relation to what consumers are spending for beef. But the deal is, ranchers that during COVID decided to sell meat instead of livestock and got along way better than they would have selling live animals are now getting enough for their calves at the ranch that they're selling them instead of feeding them out and selling meat. So that's impacting these small plants too. You asked the question, what about small plants? Small plants, custom business is dried up. They can't stay in business. I know of one plant that was built during COVID with a lot of grant money. Used to have 20 workers. It's now down to 4 workers, including the plant owner, and they aren't able to make it and pay their bills. So how hard would it be though for the government, the people who supplied the grant money, the people responsible for the antitrust law enforcement, how hard would it be for them to prioritize the government purchasing to small plants before 1 pound would ever be purchased from a multinational corporation like JBS? They won't do it. The government will not prioritize their own purchasing to USDA inspected small plants. They buy the cheapest they can find from wherever in the world it may come from, and they'd rather do business with a criminal corporation like JBS than to buy from the small plants they've provided grant money to.
So, I mean, I think we've done a good job here of getting a look at the scale of the problem and how it has its tentacles into every single link of the chain. You've somehow, over the last, few decades, managed to ride this monopoly for, just stay ahead of the wave a little bit, and watch everything kind of consolidate around you. Um, and we can see you've described it existed 40 years ago plentifully. Like it's not that like a sane way of doing this exists. It's not even that hard to imagine. And the U.S. is an incredible market for beef, um, and that we currently don't even meet with the amount of animals that we have in the U.S. I don't believe we meet the
We
demand.
had the lowest cow herd numbers since 1951, and we've never in that period of time met domestic demand. We've always required imports to meet the domestic demand. And retail prices have gone up at a 45-degree angle. Why have producers gone broke? Because they didn't maintain their fair share of that consumer dollar. And so it's not the producer that's bad, and it's not cattle prices that are causing retail prices to be high. In fact, if you look at retail prices, they're probably beef right now is a bargain compared to all the other things that we might look at. In fact, somebody just posted a pretty cool chart. Let me pull it up. Uh, Here it is. We've got beef that compared to 1980 is up 355%. A John Deere tractor is up 1180%. A round baler is up 550%. A Chevy truck pickup 2500 3/4 ton pickup is up 847%, double the amount that beef is up. Uh, we've got we've got coffee that's up 775%. We've got Doritos that are up 500%. Coca-Cola is up 536%. So beef in this list of items is the best bargain. And when you look at what consumers spend as a percentage of their disposable income, food is too cheap today. It cannot be sustained. Look what farmers are getting, 14 cents of the consumer dollar overall for food. That you're going bankrupt. And of course we are seeing it happen in front of our eyes. Look at rural America. You live there. I mean, look at rural America. It's the third world country. It's going to hell. I mean, they're draining. It's like a massive strip mining operation. They're harvesting all these resources and leaving nothing but wasteland behind. So
Strip
when
mining.
are, so we so how are we going to get consumers and politicians and everyone else to wake up? And so when I look at Massey, one of the good guys in Congress, Representative Massey from
Yes.
Virginia,
Oh yes.
right? From Virginia.
I think he's Kentucky, isn't he? I think he's Kentucky.
Kentucky. Okay. Look at his legislation, the Prime Act. It's a valiant effort to try to get some, relief for small plants. But think about his Prime Act. They're mad at USDA, and I am too. Get rid of USDA. I mean, they do nothing to make food safer. A HACCP plan paper does not make food safer. Food safer. Paper is not an intervention for pathogens. And this is crazy, the burden we put on small plants with HACCP and abusive USDA inspection. And so while the USDA is allowing the biggest meat plants in the country to self-inspect, they send the inspectors down to Greg Gunthorpe's plant, three a day to kill 30 hogs. I mean, this is absolutely insane, and it shows how much USDA is in the pocket of these big multinational, food cartel companies. So Massey comes out with this Prime Act. Okay, at first blush, looks great. Just get rid of USDA. But the problem is but it's and the problem is it's intrastate. So I can't ship across the state line. So what happens to that small plant in St. Francis, Kansas that's USDA inspected? We get the Prime Act. But our market's in Colorado. Our market's 200 miles away along the Front Range of Colorado where the people live. So I've got to cross a state line. So I don't benefit from the Prime Act, but I continue to have to pay a higher expense with USDA inspection than the guys in Colorado now that don't have to inspect at all. That's a problem. So that has to get fixed. If you're going to do a Prime Act, do it interstate. So it goes across state lines. But I'm not saying we have to have no inspection. I think some inspection is a darn good idea, because when you're in a marketplace that is controlled by predators and the low cost producer wins because they cheat, a small plant can't win, because small plants for the most part, aren't willing to cheat. But you're throwing them in a market that cheating is required to succeed and to make it. And this is the danger that we're in. So Massey gets his Prime Act. We've got Kentucky now that can feed itself. It's pretty cool. They can feed themselves. But the problem is, how do you get access to the retail in Kentucky when you don't have inspection and you probably don't have any liability insurance? And so those retail stores are going to want to know that food is safe, and they've depended upon USDA in a not rightfully so, but they've depended upon USDA to ensure some food safety. But there's also
It
a huge
seems
liability problem there.
that's my read on the Prime Act too, is that, it's I think it'd be really good for very small producers who, they can direct market, I don't know, finish out 8 to 10 head and sell them to people in their like it'd be good for those people. But if you really want to, build a mid-scale operation, if you really want to change the way that things are done, it's completely inadequate to that.
Totally, absolutely. It just doesn't work for a more regional, you know, larger kind of a plant. It just they won't be able to get market access without inspection, and
There's
not
no
being
way
able to cross
around.
state lines is a huge problem.
I think there's no way around. I mean, I think you probably agree with me here, is that there's no way around the need to punch these corporations in the face. There's no way around it.
Brooke Rollins last week finally said the big four are a problem. We've been saying it now for 30 years. She finally said the big four are a problem. Well, guess what? It's her responsibility to break them up. It's
That's
her
the thing.
responsibility to punch
Mike
them in
Lee
the
has said
nose.
it. Senator Rounds has said it. Senator Booker has said it. They've all said it in the last week. But let's see that punched.
Absolutely. But you've got to go further. You've got to break up the retail power. I mean, now what's Safeway doing right now? They're closing stores all over the place. But that was a private equity play. When Albertsons bought Safeway, that was a private equity play to turn around and make $1 billion selling to Kroger. Well, that all fell through. So what the heck? Now we don't want a grocery store chain. It's private equity people don't want anything except to make more money. So now they're closing Safeway stores all over the country. So we've got Lamar, Colorado, Lahaina, Colorado. They're going to become food deserts. Wow. I mean, who's doing anything about all that? But the fact is, a small grocer can't come in a predatory marketplace and make it. So what we need to do is enforce the Robinson-Patman Act strictly to the letter of it, and stop letting Walmart, what they're selling retail, at lower prices than what other small retailers can buy wholesale. That's a Robinson-Patman problem.
I'm not aware. Yeah, I'm not aware of that act.
Well, that came about as litigation against the A&P, which A&P was the Walmart of the day back in, what was that, the 40s, 50s. I mean, they were a monopoly on grocery and store ownership and distribution, and they broke them up.
So it seems to me, I think one of the things that I appreciate about this conversation, I think that a lot of people today think, you hear about monopolies, you see corporate consolidation. That's just sort of like the water we're swimming in. And I don't think people necessarily understand or think through, how these happen, and the impact it really has. And people, I think you talk about supply and demand and a lot of these basic economic concepts, and I think there's a belief that those things are still how our economy operate. Um, but it's not how our economy operates almost at all at this point. Like, it's not, there's nothing, especially in agriculture, that even remotely resembles a free market. It's not that. It's a captured market almost completely. And it's captured, and there's not necessarily a way out without some taking the fight to the people who have captured it.
Absolutely. And the government is the only one big enough to get it done. You've got to have law enforcement. You have to have rules. And we haven't
A
had
lot of my
rules now
more
for
friends on the right, really don't like to hear that, right? Because they want a small government, they want low regulation, they don't want, but I don't see, there's not another way.
No, there isn't another way, and a lot of even those guys are starting to see that. Look at the AI thing, and just the whole concentration of power and wealth in the hands of a few. We're running into it everywhere we go, whether it's your technology for your uh, TV viewing at your house. I mean, we're paying more for technology today than we used to pay for a home mortgage, 30, 40 years ago. Uh, People are just getting tired. I mean, we're working three jobs instead of one, to feed a family and care for a family, and to own a home. Now you can't even own a home for the competition from BlackRock. They want you to rent and be happy. And people just can't create any kind of wealth today for all of the concentration and consolidation. So it really is required by the government is the only one that can break up this abusive market power.
So I agree completely with that. And also, you've managed to kind of stay ahead of it a little bit, and I'm wondering what else a person can do. If you're interested in trying to build capacity and even selfishly, as my own little operation here, we continue to use our own resources to build it, with the hope that this can all get figured out. What
Well,
sort
Nate,
of
let's talk about that. We've got this massive share of our food dollar that's going to the big retailers. They're not going to willing to give it up. The packers, drive that getaway car, hand off all this below cost of production stuff to the big retailers. They make the big money. The Walton family just becomes richer and richer. And how do we get around that? So, I mean, you can do something like a Ranch Foods Direct, but it hasn't been easy. And as we lose wholesale, we lose our ability to sell the grind. The big problem is the grind, and this is where the government, if they could come in and guarantee small plants that they wouldn't have excess trim and grind, because they buy a lot of that, and get it into the hospitals and get it into the rest homes and get it into the school system and improve the health of our people. Get rid of the pink slime that's in this you know factory industrial product that's out there. So let's do an end run. Let's do it on a scale like you talk about, the scale that we can literally build local regional food systems. What I'm proposing that I want to do is build a maker owned marketplace. And basically what I'm telling you is this is a public market. It's where everybody wants to be in Milwaukee at their public market. It's where everybody wants to be at the Philadelphia uh, market, the Reading Terminal market. It's where everybody wants to be at the Pike Place market in Seattle. These are energy sources of energy, centers of energy where people want to be. You're getting your beer, your burger, your fish and chips. I don't whatever it is. Let's build these marketplaces that are not food halls. They are not owned by landlord that's ripping everybody off that's in there, charging them too much rents. One of the things that happened during COVID that really hurt Ranch Foods Direct is we lost a bunch of our wholesale business. One hamburger place that we dealt with bought 1,600 pounds of ground beef every week, and they were the most popular fast burger in town. They went out of business. They're gone. And it was partial because of aggressive landlords raising rents, and the city being willing to work with them on some remodeling that they were doing in one of their restaurants. But anyway, they got tired and they shut down. So that really hurt us. So what we need is not a public market where people pay rents for a booth or a little space in there to set up a table and sell, fruits and vegetables. I'm talking about a maker-owned market that's got a full-blown meat market in it with carcasses hanging. It's got a full-blown brewery with beer being brewed and served. It's got a bakery. It's got a candy shop. It's got the cheese maker in there, literally making the cheese like they do at the Pike Place Market, right there in front of you behind glass. It's got everything a community needs to eat well. It doesn't have the processed foods. It doesn't have all the high fructose corn syrup, and it doesn't have hydrogenated vegetable oils. They're cooking everything in tallow and lard. It is nothing but healthy and good for the community. And the maker is the key to this. So these are owners. These are the guys that actually do the work of transitioning commodity or cattle and wheat and everything else into the end consumer good. So give them a home that's safe and give them a home where they can get the synergy off of each other. So we co-locate them into this amazing space that's got a lot of common area where people can get together and eat and talk and get along, and it really becomes the heart and soul of your community. So I want to build those. And once you
That
get the
solves a lot of
makers,
problems. The thing you said there at the end, I want to highlight too, because in my day job, I'm a mental health therapist. That's my job, and the lack of social connection, the lack of community spaces like that, is a huge part that's driving this mental health crisis we have as well. So I wanted to actually mention that that's also, aside from the food, that is a feature of what you're talking about that's really important.
it was a few weeks ago, Michael Schmakanish on Saturday morning was talking about just the complete breakdown of people. I mean, just not having, they were talking about loneliness.
Yes.
I think that was the subject.
Yes.
And he says, we need to mingle more. So you're absolutely right. That is a huge, huge benefit of a marketplace like this. But these makers have been exploited just like the farmer, just like the worker. So I mean, talk about the taco shop that got their dream location in a new strip mall north of Falcon, Colorado. And the landlord, they get crossways with the landlord when he wants to continue to raise the rents and charge them all kinds of other cam charges and everything else. They finally had to give it up. They lost their $250,000 investment in that brick and mortar location, and he's back in his food truck again. Or take the cheesesteak outfit that had a thriving uh, location in a rented space out east by Peterson Air Force Base, and the landlord came in and raised the rents during COVID enough to where they drove them out of business. Compare that to the keg in Manitou that actually owned their real estate. COVID hit, seats went empty. They bought their meat from us, so we know they kept doing business, but they were doing meals to takeout meals. So the mom, the dad, the son, and the daughter-in-law kept working in the kitchen. The whole front of the house staff went home with their PPP money. They were happy. The restaurant continued to operate at a normal throughput, making money, and they used their PPP money to remodel the place. Can you see the difference between the two? So they own their real estate in this maker-owned market. What happens in 20 or 30 years when the maker is ready to retire? He's already trained his replacements. And if they want to buy the place, he's going to finance it for them at very advantageous rates. And he's always going to be there if they need help. And he's able to retire now in comfort, add his mortgage income to his Social Security, and he's setting good.
So you're
Compare that to
describing
BlackRock's ownership of
Yeah.
everything.
You're describing distributed ownership, right? And that's
Exactly.
as opposed to, like, I think you have on the one hand, you have this crony, consolidated capitalism, and on the other side, you've got socialism. But I think what you're describing is, just distributed ownership. Like,
I
and
think
that's
that's right. I think that's a very good description of it. But the big deal is how do you get those makers financed? Well, I'm saying look at it from a developer's perspective. So I'm going to develop this real estate, whether it's an existing repurpose situation or brand new ground up. I'm going to build it to sell, not to rent. I'm going to build it to sell. And then I'm going to get my makers, the people that bake the bread and cut the meat, I'm going to get them a 504 small business loan. Small Business Administration has a 504 loan program. It's very low, very, very low down payment required and a good interest rate. And so we get them fixed up with the 504 loan program. And what else, considering we need a food system that actually feeds Americans and doesn't exploit them, what else can the government do to facilitate this kind of thing? And honestly, who is more important, the landlord that owns the real estate or the guy that's actually cooking food and preparing food for society? And they've been just totally taken advantage of. And so this maker owned market, I think, is a real deal. We need to build the first one and then replicate them all over the country. And makers need to become business owners again and owners of their own real estate.
Yeah. And and there's a reason, we moved here 13 years ago. We've been, learning and raising, cattle and marketing a few, for 8 years now. So I'm just now beginning to feel like I have a clue. But I think, beef is, obviously it's a wonderful product. I think it's symbolically really, 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 really important. People love it. Um, it is kind of an industry where there's at least a little bit of holdout of independent producers, even though, as you talk about, they're under tremendous strain. And I think with these maker markets, having the hanging beef seems just vitally important, because I mean, that's the people want beef. It brings people in. It's just there's a power there. Without that, I think, it's diminished. So I just think having beef right at the center of the thing, not necessarily the centerpiece, but it seems like a really important aspect.
Well, and we've got retail today that's the lowest quality it's ever been, and consumers aren't happy. I mean, you go out and you eat a restaurant, and you're eating a blade tenderized, flavored, pumped, whatever. I mean, you don't feel great after the meal. It's hard to digest. It's just not good. We've declined quality of beef. Performance enhancing drugs should be outlawed. We shouldn't be implanting and using steroids and beta agonists on these cattle. That just makes that meat less tender, less flavorful, and hurts the industry. We need to quit it. So, but if in a maker-owned market, you'd have like a homeowners agreement. You'd all agree that a Cisco truck doesn't show up, that we buy local, we help each other, we sell to one another to whatever extent we possibly can. Those are easy kinds of agreements that we could put together, but it all goes to improve the value of that place, of that marketplace. And so you think about improving the value of that marketplace. What did it cost to build? Either way, whether you're renting or whether you're owning with a mortgage, you're still paying the mortgage either way. So let's build it to sell. Let's create a value there that's recognized by the marketplace as being very very solid. So now what's the ability for a maker to go in and be part of the building of this market? What's his ability to borrow money against that based on its market value? And I would say that the market value would be more than, certainly a lot more than what it costs to build. Now he's got the equity he needs for the loan. But the deal is, you build enough of these markets and you expose the unfairness of the alternative industrialized system, then the industrial system is going to get more attention through by antitrust and politicians and Congress and so forth, and we can then start raising the floor for farmers everywhere on everything that they produce.
And we
So
can
it
kind of
the
conceptually prove that it's possible to do it this other way. And
Well,
I
we've
want,
already done that
yeah,
through a little old tiny Ranch Foods Direct model,
yeah.
but I guarantee you, it's hard when you get this much predatory behavior in the market and this much power in the hands of so few. It's very very hard. But you can't believe the value of co-location. Like our Ranch Foods Direct Fillmore store, it's it's it sells everything you can possibly put in it from the local marketplace. But outside of our store on Fillmore, our main retail location is the best tacos in Colorado Springs in a little food trailer, and smash burgers with fries cooked in beef tallow. That improves the business for both of us to be able to co-locate. It's amazing just the synergy that you get out of that. So people, where can you get a good taco in town? Oh, it's El Chapin over there on Fillmore by the Ranch Food Store. Oh, cool. They go over there and then they see the Ranch Food Store. So what did that do? I mean, those are the kinds of benefits. I can't tell you percentage wise, but it's significant the amount of customers that brings Ranch Foods, and then Ranch Foods brings El Chapin business as well.
Every step of the chain, and this is, I kind of said this a minute ago, but I want to reiterate it because I think it's just the way out. It's not that, we have predatory capitalism, which, like we can just critique it forever. It's the worst. But the solution you're talking about, again, is not socialist. It's distributed ownership. And I think that's the way forward. I love it. I love what you're saying, and I want to I want to amplify it, and I kind of want to think more about how do we
Well, if you
get
go to
this
my
moving.
blog, look up Maker Own Market. I got a whole blog piece on that. So go to mikecallicrate.com and click on the blog, and you'll find the Maker Own Market. I've got I've really got it detailed out. But who isn't in favor of those markets are the existing developers, the ones that want to collect rents in perpetuity. They don't like that idea. They don't want ownership. They want to be able to collect rents. So we
God,
just got to go around
every
them.
single thing you do.
Yeah, exactly.
Joel Salatin, he's of course famously, wrote the book and said everything I want to do is illegal. Um, and I think that that's great, but we need another a part two of that, which is everything that I want to do is owned by someone else, is extorted from.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
so
Well,
like
and
there's
my
that.
whole deal is, you know, everybody's upset. I mean, and have every right to be upset. And things are pretty gloomy. And I'm just saying, let's just go home. Let's go home and treat our neighbor great, help each other, build an economy that's isolated and separate of Wall Street. And we can do that around food. Food brings people together. And it also, the process of creating food creates wealth. And if we can keep as much of that wealth in our communities as we can, it's good. It's a good thing.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're nearing the 2 hour mark, and appreciate your time so much. This has been a really wonderful conversation, um, inspiring to me, and kind of right exactly what I was hoping to, again, contextualize the beef controversy. Which, I guess, to wrap up on that note, that's my hope, is that there is, last 2 weeks there's a lot of anger, and like you mentioned, we've had the ag secretary, we've had senators, we've like mentioned the big four packers. This is broken through in a way, and so my hope is that there's something to build on here. Do you have thoughts on that before we wrap up?
Well, I hope they're getting it. We've had some folks go to Washington, I think, kind of break through on a lot of things. Of course, probably equally or even more so, the cartel is pushed back. They don't want any controls whatsoever. They want to continue on their path of maximizing profits. But I really think this thing has broke through. We got Maha now that's kind of waking things up. Uh, if to where we can start to eat real food again, perhaps, which all this would play right into it. Local, regional food system development is going to produce a much healthier and better product than food from around the globe wherever they can find it the cheapest. So I'm optimistic. I,
The other thing from this too that I hope is breaking through a little bit is, from my perspective, there's a lot of like the big farm lobbying organizations that are just such a huge part of the problem, in my opinion. They're not lobbying for farmers, and there's a mistaken thought that they do.
right.
I'll go ahead and name it. I mean, like around where I'm at, it's the American Farm Bureau. Purports to represent farmers, but they are for the grain and machinery and blah blah blah. They're not, in my opinion.
Yes.
They
And
don't
it's
represent
NCBA
farmers.
on the cattle side.
Yeah, and so and my hope is that producers, the public at large, but most of the producers are kind of, not that they aren't aware of that fact, but a little bit more willing to tell them to take a hike. Like we shouldn't be allowing these, astroturfed organizations to speak for an industry when they're anything but friends.
That's right. That's been a huge problem. And but the power, the big meat and food cartels have captured these organizations many years ago. Many years ago, they captured them, and they've served them very well. I mean, just look at the percentage of what a producer gets out of a food system, and it's just wrong.
And to add insult to injury, of course, our beef checkoff dollars have to go to fund these people who are working against us.
We're buying our own hanging rope.
Oh, it's an insult.
It is.
So I'm hoping, there that can gain some steam too, is a little bit of a rebellion against these organizations that claim to speak for us, but are stabbing us right in the kidneys.
Absolutely. And they're spending their money on mentally conditioning people to think they're doing good things, and the opposite's true.
It's worked. It's worked for them. I'll give them that.
Right. Right.
So I'm hoping there's enough goodwill left. I mean, still in rural communities, farming is important. And so hopefully we can kind of have some more awareness of the problems that we're talking about here, and maybe some belief in alternatives, and that we can start working together to create the kind of make our own markets that you're talking about, and kind of starting to cut out this middleman and build enough strength to actually bring the fight to where it needs to be.
I sure hope so. I'm going to keep at it.
Yeah, well, me too, and I really have enjoyed this conversation. Um, so, Mike
Well,
Callicrate,
it's been my pleasure, Nate. You asked great questions too. You got it very well. Thank
thank
you.
you. And we'll do more interviews here on Doomer Optimism for Beef Week coming up, because we're going to look at this problem as many different ways as we can, and figure out how to do something different. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Nate.